They thought humanity needed to be quarantined, but the truth was that they were the ones being observed. Beneath layers of research labs and classified archives, a far greater plan was unfolding, one that could upend the galaxy's psychological order. The Ethics Committee's worst nightmare. Unauthorized access detected in Section 7B of the Xenopsychology archives, the station's AI announced, its voice echoing through the pristine corridors of Research Station Omega. Lead researcher Dryan glanced up from the holographic display, all four of their eyes narrowing simultaneously. Nobody accessed Section 7B. Nobody was supposed to even know it existed. "Computer, identify the access point," Dryan commanded, their scaled fingers already dancing across the control panel. Access originated from Lab Complex 23, Terminal 5. Dryan's respiratory ridges flared. That was Dr. Solan's lab, the same researcher who'd been asking increasingly strange questions about human emotional responses during their weekly briefings. "Show me the accessed files," Dryan ordered, their secondary heart beginning to race. The holographic display flickered, revealing a series of classified documents labeled Project Mirror, Human Psychological Warfare Resistance Studies. "By the 7 moons," Dryan muttered, quickly initiating the emergency shutdown protocol. These files had been sealed for good reason. The last time anyone had attempted to study human psychological responses, an entire research vessel had disappeared near the Sol System's asteroid belt. The door to the control room hissed open. "Researcher Dryan, your presence is required immediately, Ethics Board." Representative Tazik stood in the doorway, their ceremonial robes practically vibrating with barely contained fury. The bioluminescent patterns across their face were pulsing an angry red, never a good sign. "Representative Tazik, I was just about to contact you," Dryan said, trying to keep their voice steady. "We have a situation." "A situation." Tazik's laugh was sharp enough to crack glass. "That's what you call a Level 1 breach of the Earth Quarantine Protocol. Someone accessed files that could restart the human wars, and you call it a situation." "With all due respect, Representative," Dryan countered, straightening to their full height. "I discovered this breach exactly 3 minutes ago. Instead of wasting time with bureaucratic posturing, perhaps we should focus on containing it." The bioluminescent patterns on Tazik's face shifted to a dangerous purple. "Watch your tone, researcher. The Ethics Board doesn't look kindly on insubordination, especially from someone with your history." Dryan's outer membrane rippled with suppressed anger. "My history of maintaining the highest security protocols while actually getting work done, or my history of refusing to bury inconvenient discoveries that might upset the board's delicate sensibilities." Before Tazik could respond, the station's AI interrupted again. "Alert! Lab Complex 23 is now in emergency lockdown. Life signs detected in ventilation system." "Ventilation system." Tazik's patterns shifted to alarmed yellow. "But that leads to the quantum communication hub," Dryan finished, already moving toward the door. "Computer, track those life signs and alert Security Chief Commander Elira." "Representative Tazik, you can either help me stop whatever Dr. Solan is planning, or you can stand there practicing your disapproving expressions. Your choice." Tazik's patterns flashed between several colors before settling on a resigned blue. "This goes against at least 15 protocols. So does stealing classified files about human psychology," Dryan retorted, checking their neural disruptor. "But somehow I don't think Dr. Solan is too concerned about protocols right now." As they hurried through the station's corridors, Dryan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The last time someone had tried to understand how human minds worked, It had led to the quarantine of an entire solar system. Whatever Dr. Solon had discovered in those files, Drayan had a sinking feeling that the ethics board's carefully maintained peace was about to be shattered. And somewhere, in the ventilation system above them, in the darkness between decks, something moved with purpose toward the quantum communication hub, carrying secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. The quantum communication hub buzzed with activity as Drayan and Tazik burst through the doors. Security Chief Commander Elira was already there, her tentacle arrays spread wide to interface with multiple control panels simultaneously. "Status report," Drayan demanded, moving to the central console. "Bad news and worse news," Commander Elira replied, her chromatophores flickering with stress patterns. "Dr. Solon managed to transmit something before we locked down the systems, and you're really not going to like what we found in his lab." The main screen lit up with a cascade of information, research notes, psychological profiles, and what appeared to be covert observation logs of human behavior. But it was the header on one particular file that made Drayan's primary heart stop. "Project Looking Glass's feasibility study of human integration into galactic society." "No, no, no," Tazik whispered, all pretense of bureaucratic authority gone. He wasn't just studying the old files. He was planning to restart the whole program. Commander Elira's tentacles flew across the controls, bringing up more documents. "It gets worse. Look at the transmission logs. He sent packets to research outposts in 3 different systems. We're dealing with a network, not a lone researcher." "Show me his personal logs," Drayan ordered. The screen shifted, revealing Dr. Solon's last recorded entry. They were wrong about the humans, all of them. The quarantine was based on fear, not fact. Yes, the first contact incident was a disaster, but we misinterpreted everything. Their resistance to our standard psychological protocols wasn't a sign of danger. It was proof of their potential. Think about it, an entire species immune to mental manipulation. Do you have any idea what that could mean for galactic security? "He's insane," Tazik declared, patterns flashing crimson. "The first contact incident killed thousands. We lost an entire diplomatic fleet because we underestimated human psychological defenses." "Did we?" Drayan questioned, scrolling through more files. "Look at these analysis patterns. Dr. Solon might be breaking every protocol in existence, but his research methodology is sound. He found something in the original data that everyone else missed." The screen filled with footage from the first contact incident. The images were familiar to every xenopsychology student. The diplomatic fleet approaching Earth, the standard peaceful contact protocols being initiated, and then chaos. The human minds had not just resisted the standard calming procedures. They had somehow reflected them back, causing widespread panic among the contact team. "Wait," Commander Elira interrupted, her tentacles freezing mid-motion. "Enhance that segment." The footage zoomed in on one particular human's face during the incident. While everyone else was reacting with confusion or fear, this individual was showing something else entirely. "They're focusing," Drayan realized, leaning closer. "Not resisting, redirecting. The humans weren't trying to attack us at all. They were defending themselves from what they perceived as a mental assault." "That's impossible," Tazik protested, but their patterns had shifted to uncertain green. "Our contact protocols are designed to be completely benign. No species has ever interpreted them as hostile." "No species we've encountered," Drayan corrected. "But look at what Dr. Solon discovered about human neural architecture. Their minds evolved in complete isolation from galactic psychological standards. They developed their own unique defensive mechanisms. When we tried to establish peaceful contact using our normal methods, we accidentally triggered their mental immune system," Commander Elira finished, her chromatophores paling. "Which means the quarantine." A new alarm blared through the hub. On the main screen, a message flashed. "Secondary transmission detected. Origin, Earth. Observation post, Sigma 9. "There are no observation posts near Earth," Tazik said automatically. "The quarantine prohibits." "Apparently," Dryan cut in grimly, "Dr. Solon isn't the only one who's been breaking protocols. Computer, trace that transmission. And someone get me Liaison Officer Agent Kyle. If there's really been a secret observation post watching Earth all this time, I want to know who authorized it." "Authorization found," the computer announced. "Project Looking Glass was approved by the Ethics Board, classified Level Ultra, dated 3 cycles before the first Mortact incident." All eyes turned to Tazik, whose patterns had gone completely dark. Representative Tazik Nix 8 said quietly, "I believe you have some explaining to do." Above them, in the still-open ventilation shaft, something small and metallic dropped from Dr. Solon's last known position. The countdown display read 3 minutes and falling. The real discoveries were just beginning. "This isn't a research station," Dryan said, staring at the schematic hovering before them. "It's an iceberg." Beneath the official levels of Research Station Omega, a vast network of hidden laboratories stretched into the asteroid's core. The classified blueprint had appeared on their screens moments after the device in the ventilation shaft had detonated, not with an explosion, but with a massive data burst that had torn through the station's security protocols like paper. 27 levels of classified research space, Security Chief Commander Elira announced, her tentacles moving in agitated patterns, and were picking up active power signatures from at least 15 of them. Tazik remained silent, their patterns still dark. After their earlier revelation, the Ethics Board representative had stopped offering protests or explanations. "Station security systems are designed to keep people out," Dryan mused, studying the layout. "But these lower levels, they're designed to keep something in." Officer Agent Kale's voice crackled over the comm. "Main elevator shaft to the underground complex is sealed, but I found something interesting. Maintenance tunnel C459 shows signs of recent use. Sending coordinates now." "Let me guess," Commander Elira said, checking the data. "Dr. Solon's credentials were the last ones logged." "No," Agent Kyle replied. "That's the interesting part. Last access was logged to Representative Tazik's security profile 2 standard hours ago." All eyes turned to Tazik again. The Ethics Board representative's outer membrane rippled. "We need to get down there now before he reaches the containment level." "The what level?" Dryan demanded. "Talk while we move," Commander Elira ordered, already heading for the maintenance tunnel. "And someone please tell me why my security clearance never showed any of this." The maintenance shaft was a tight fit, especially for Commander Elira's tentacle arrays. As they descended, Tazik finally began to explain. "The first contact incident wasn't our first interaction with humans," they said, pattern shifting to a sickly yellow. "We'd been studying them for decades before that. Project Looking Glass was supposed to be the culmination of our research, a controlled first contact scenario based on years of psychological observation. But something went wrong," Dryan guessed. "Not wrong," Tazik corrected. "Something went right. Too right. The humans didn't just resist our psychological protocols, they showed signs of being able to adapt to them, learn from them. Some even demonstrated the ability to use them." The shaft ended at a heavy security door. Agent Kyle was already there, neural disruptor ready. Life signs on the other side, multiple signatures moving fast. Dr. Solin's not working alone, Commander Elira realized. He found others who shared his theories, Tazik confirmed. Researchers who believe the quarantine was a mistake, that humans weren't a threat, but an opportunity. The door's control panel sparked under Agent Kyle's expert touch, and the barrier slid open. They emerged into a corridor that looked nothing like the levels above. The walls were lined with observation windows, each looking into rooms filled with sophisticated monitoring equipment. "These are all active feeds," Dryan said in disbelief, looking at the data streams. "From Earth. You've been watching them this entire time." "Not just watching," a new voice announced. Dr. Solin stepped out of a side room flanked by two other researchers Dryan didn't recognize. "Learning, growing, understanding the most remarkable species we've ever encountered." "Step away from the console," Dr. Agent Kale ordered, raising their disruptor. "Or what?" Ven laughed. "You'll add more violations to my file. Look at these readings. Humans don't just resist psychological manipulation. They've developed natural defenses against it. Defenses that could revolutionize galactic society. They developed those defenses because they had to." Tazik snapped, patterns flaring red. "Because their own history is full of attempts at psychological warfare. They're dangerous because they understand concepts most species never even considered." "Exactly." Ven's eyes gleamed with fervor. "And now, thanks to the data we've collected, we can finally understand how they do it. We can learn from them instead of fearing them." Us. Alarm blared through the facility. On the nearest screen, a message flashed. "Containment breach in progress. Level 25 security protocols initiated." "What did you do?" Tazik demanded, patterns shifting to pure white fear. "I didn't do anything," Ven replied calmly. "They did. We underestimated them again. Did you really think we could study human psychological patterns without them noticing? Without them learning about us in return?" The screens around them flickered. In each observation feed, the humans being monitored turned and looked directly at the cameras, directly at them. "They know we're watching," Dryan whispered. "They've always known," Ven said. "And now, thanks to the data burst I sent, every research station in the galaxy is about to learn exactly what humans are capable of. The quarantine was never about protecting us from them." The facility's lights began to flicker as new alarms joined the first. "It was about protecting them from us," Ven finished. "At least that's what we were meant to think." The screens went dark simultaneously. When they reactivated, a single message appeared on each one. "Thank you for participating in our study of alien psychology. Phase 2 will now commence." The real experiment, it seemed, was just beginning. The screens continued to flicker with new data. Not the observation feeds they'd been watching, but thousands of research files. Not about humans, but about every alien species that had ever studied them. "No," Tazik breathed, patterns cycling through colors so rapidly they became a blur. "This is impossible. The humans couldn't have. And they've been studying us back," Agent Kyle finished, lowering their neural disruptor. "Look at these files. Behavioral analysis, psychological response patterns, societal structure evaluations. They've been gathering data on us since before we even knew they existed." Dryan moved to the central console, their fingers flying over the controls. "These files, they're not just observations. They're experiments. The humans have been running psychological tests on every research team that tried to study them." "Of course they have," Dr. Solin said, sounding almost proud. "Why do you think they let us maintain observation posts? Did you really believe we could hide them from a species that developed global surveillance networks centuries ago?" Security Chief Commander Alira's tentacles coiled tightly. The first contact incident was a test, a new voice announced. Everyone turned to see Liaison Officer Agent Kale step forward, but their posture had changed completely. Gone was the slightly deferential stance of a minor bureaucrat. They stood now, with an authority that seemed to fill the room. Agent Kyle Nix. 8 questioned. Not exactly, they replied, though that identity has served its purpose. I represent the Human Psychological Research Initiative. We've been monitoring your civilization's development for quite some time. You're human, Cavo gasped. Biosculpted to pass as your species? Yes, though I must say your genetic screening protocols were surprisingly easy to bypass. Your species tends to focus so much on physical security that you often overlook psychological indicators. Dr. Solon laughed, a sound bordering on hysteria. I knew it. The patterns were too perfect, too consistent. No quarantined species could have developed such complex defensive mechanisms by accident. We didn't, Agent Kyle confirmed. We developed them because we knew they'd be necessary. Your civilization isn't the first to achieve interstellar travel, and you won't be the last. Humanity learned long ago that the greatest threats often come disguised as peaceful first contact. Drayan's outer membrane rippled as understanding dawned. The quarantine. You arranged it, engineered it. We needed time, Agent Kyle explained, moving to the central console. Time to understand the various species that might one day reach Earth. Time to develop countermeasures against psychological manipulation techniques we'd never encountered before. The quarantine gave us that time. The screens around them filled with new data recordings of every attempted first contact, every covert study, every probe sent to observe Earth. But now they showed the other side of those encounters, revealed the hidden tests and evaluations being run on the observers themselves. Your species' approach to psychological research is fascinating, Agent Kyle continued. You seek to understand minds by imposing patterns on them, by finding ways to guide and control them. You never considered that this very approach might blind you to other possibilities. Like what? Commander Elira demanded. Like the fact that true psychological strength doesn't come from control, Agent Kyle said. It comes from adaptation, from resistance, from the ability to maintain identity under pressure. Humanity didn't develop mental defenses because we were isolated. We developed them because our own history taught us their necessity. Cavo's patterns had settled into a steady, pulsing gray. All this time, every study, every observation post, every attempt to understand human psychology. It was part of our study of you, Agent Kale finished. Dr. Solon here came closest to understanding. He saw the patterns, recognized that something wasn't quite right about the quarantine, but even he didn't grasp the full scope. The data burst, Drayan realized. You wanted him to send it. Agent Kyle smiled, an expression that looked decidedly unnatural on their biosculpted features. We needed a way to distribute our findings throughout your scientific community. The ethics board would have buried them otherwise. They've done it before. The facility's lights stabilized and new data began flowing across the screens. But this time it wasn't just research files. They were watching real-time feeds from research stations across the galaxy, showing the chaos as their carefully maintained understanding of human psychology crumbled in the face of the truth. What happens now? Dr. Solon asked, his earlier confidence replaced by something closer to awe. Now? Agent Kale's smile widened. Now we move to the next phase. Your civilization has proven itself capable of recognizing its own biases. of adapting when presented with evidence that challenges its fundamental assumptions. That's what we needed to confirm. This was all a test, Drayen said quietly. Not of human psychological responses, but of how we would react when our own psychological assumptions were challenged. Precisely, Agent Kyle confirmed. And you passed. Not with flying colors, perhaps, but well enough to justify moving forward with actual first contact. Actual... Kavo's patterns froze mid-pulse. You mean, the quarantine ends today, Agent Kyle announced. The real diplomatic team is already on its way, and this time there won't be any need for psychological manipulation protocols or defensive countermeasures. Just honest communication between species who understand and respect each other's mental sovereignty. The screens around them changed one final time, showing a fleet of ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. Ships unlike anything in their records, bearing markings they'd never seen before. The truth hadn't just emerged. It had been waiting for them to catch up to it all along. And somewhere on Earth, in hidden facilities much like this one, humanity was preparing to finally step onto the galactic stage. Not as a quarantined curiosity, but as equals who had earned their place through the most comprehensive psychological evaluation in galactic history. The real first contact was about to begin. The moment the diplomatic fleet appeared on screen, Dr. Makar Solon bolted, not toward the exit, but deeper into the facility, shoving past stunned researchers as alarms blared to life. "Stop him!" Kavo shouted, patterns flashing warning red. "He has the original psychological warfare protocols." Drayen sprinted after Ven, their modified legs easily outpacing the others. Behind them, Agent Kyle's voice crackled over the comm. "He's heading for the quantum transmission hub, level 32. If he broadcasts those protocols, the diplomatic fleet will perceive it as an attack," Commander Illyra finished, her tentacles propelling her through the corridors at surprising speed. The whole first contact could be compromised. The chase led them through a maze of increasingly secure research areas. Each blast door they passed bore higher classification markings until they reached sections even Kavo's credentials couldn't access. "How does he have clearance for these levels?" Drayen demanded between breaths. "He doesn't," Agent Kyle responded, somehow keeping pace, despite their supposedly biosculpted form. "This is what we were afraid of. He's not working alone." As if on cue, security barriers began slamming down behind them, nearly catching Commander Illyra's trailing tentacles. On their comm units, a new voice spoke cold, precise, and definitely not from their team. "Dr. Solon, proceed to Transmission Chamber 5. Security measures are in place. The protocol will not be interrupted." "High Council," Kavo gasped, patterns shifting to pure white shock. "That's a High Council security override. Not just any counselor," Agent Kyle added grimly. "That's First Speaker Varn, the one who originally proposed the human quarantine." They burst into a vast circular chamber, just in time to see Dr. Solon reaching for a quantum transmission console. But he wasn't alone. A holographic figure stood beside him, tall, decorated in the formal robes of the Galactic High Council. "First Speaker," Kavo began, stepping forward, but froze as security drones descended from the ceiling, weapons armed. "Stay where you are," First Speaker Varn commanded. "You have no idea what's really at stake here." "Oh, I think we do," Agent Kyle countered, their biosculpted features beginning to shift subtly. "You're not afraid of human psychological abilities. You're afraid of what they represent. A species that can resist psychological control." Speaker Varn's hologram sneered. "One that might teach others to do the same." Do you have any idea how many civilizations we've guided using those protocols? How many potential conflicts we've prevented? You mean how many species you've subtly manipulated? Dryan realized. The psychological protocols aren't just for first contact, are they? They're how the Council maintains control. Peace, Speaker Varn corrected. We maintain peace through gentle guidance, through subtle suggestion, 1,000 worlds working together in harmony because we help them want the same things. Through mental manipulation, Agent Kael said, their form now shifting more dramatically. No matter how benevolent you claim it is, you're still deciding for them, still controlling them. Better control than chaos, Dr. Solon shouted, his fingers flying over the console. Humans aren't just immune to the protocols. They can teach others to resist them if that knowledge spreads. The chamber's lights flickered. On every screen, transmission indicators began flashing red. Too late, Ven announced triumphantly. The protocols are already broadcasting. When the diplomatic fleet receives them, they already have a new voice, announced. The chamber's main screen activated, showing the bridge of the lead human ship. The captain's smile was cold. 5 minutes ago, would you like to see how well they worked? The color drained from Speaker Varn's holographic form. Impossible. The quantum transmission only just started. Agent Kael finished, their biosculpted disguise now fully dissolved, revealing their human features. That's the problem with relying too heavily on psychological manipulation. You forget that some species prefer more direct approaches. The security drones suddenly turned, training their weapons on Ven and Speaker Varn's hologram instead of the team. Like hacking your security systems, Agent Kael continued, or maintaining deep cover agents in your government, or letting your conspirators think they're succeeding right up until the moment they incriminate themselves in front of witnesses. Speaker Varn's hologram flickered as the first speaker took an involuntary step back. You couldn't have known. Our protocols are perfect. Our security has been compromised for decades, the human captain announced. Every psychological protocol you developed, every manipulation technique you refined. We've had countermeasures ready before you even implemented them. Commander Alira's tentacles coiled in appreciation. The quarantine. It wasn't just to study us. It was to contain the spread of the Council's control protocols until we could prove the full extent of their misuse. Agent Kael confirmed. Thank you, Dr. Solon. Your attempted transmission just provided the last piece of evidence we needed. Ven stared at the console in horror as his authentication codes began systematically locking him out. Around them, the station systems came alive with new authority codes, human ones. The Ethics Committee's worst nightmare, Dryan mused, finally understanding. It wasn't humans resisting psychological control. It was humans exposing how that control had been misused. The human captain nodded. Precisely. Now, first speaker, Speaker Varn. I believe the Galactic Assembly would be very interested in seeing the records of this conversation, along with the complete history of the Council's psychological manipulation program. As security teams finally breached the chamber, Dryan couldn't help but appreciate the irony. The species they tried so hard to understand had understood them all along, and in doing so, they'd revealed a truth that would reshape galactic society forever. The real quarantine was finally ending, but perhaps not in the way anyone had expected. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered for what the media was calling the Trial of the Millennium. The Ethics Committee members sat in their elevated pods, their usual confidence replaced by visible discomfort. Dryan stood at the witness podium, facing the assembled dignitaries. To summarize, The human quarantine was never meant to protect us from them. It was a carefully orchestrated operation to prevent the spread of unauthorized psychological manipulation techniques while gathering evidence of their misuse. First Speaker, Speaker Varn and Dr. Solon sat in the defendant's box, surrounded by security fields. Their attempts to broadcast the control protocols had triggered the final phase of a plan decades in the making. And these humans, Committee Chair Yox asked. They were aware of our observations the entire time. Not just aware, Agent KL said, stepping forward in their now human form. We actively encouraged them. Each observation post you established became another point of data collection for our investigation. The assembly hall erupted in shocked whispers. Security Chief Commander Elira's report was displayed on the massive screens. Detailed documentation of every unauthorized psychological manipulation the Council had performed over the centuries. The implications are staggering, Tazik admitted, their patterns showing genuine remorse. Not just the unauthorized studies of Earth, but the systematic control of developing civilizations, all under the guise of peaceful guidance. Which brings us to the new classification protocols, Agent Keel announced. The screens shifted, displaying a new framework for interstellar relations. Earth isn't being declassified because we've deemed humans safe. We're declassifying it because humanity is offering something unprecedented. The human captain's image appeared on the main screen. We're offering choice. Real choice. Every civilization affected by the Council's protocols will be given access to our psychological defense techniques. They'll have the opportunity to decide their own path forward, free from hidden manipulation. You're talking about dismantling centuries of stability, one of the committee members protested. No, Drayen corrected. We're talking about building genuine stability based on mutual understanding and respect, not control. The screens filled with new data records of human psychological research spanning centuries. But these weren't studies of control or manipulation. They were studies of resilience, adaptation, and growth. Here's what your observations missed, Agent Keel explained. Humans didn't develop psychological resistance because we were isolated. We developed it because our history taught us the value of mental freedom, the right to think, to choose, to disagree, even if those choices sometimes lead to conflict. The assembly hall grew quiet as the implications sank in. Then, from one of the observer pods, a new voice spoke. One that made every security officer in the room reach for their weapons, which is exactly why humanity is the perfect species to oversee this transition. But the speaker stepped into the light, revealing a face that every person in the room recognized, Council member Ambassador Ryan, who had supposedly died 20 years ago. Another human agent? Speaker Varn demanded from the defendant's box. No. Ambassador Ryan replied with a smile. Something far more interesting. I'm what happens when a species chooses to learn from humanity rather than fear them. My people were among the first to discover Earth, long before the Council. We chose cooperation over control, partnership over manipulation. The final piece of evidence appeared on the screens. Records of dozens of civilizations that had secretly broken free from the Council's protocols, guided not by human control, but by human example. The real question, Agent Kyle said, addressing the assembly, isn't whether Earth should be quarantined. It's whether you're ready to accept the responsibility that comes with true psychological freedom. When the vote, when it came, was not unanimous. Change never is. But as the results were announced, as the new protocols were enacted, and as the first official human diplomatic missions prepared to depart, Drayen understood what their research had missed all along. The greatest strength of human psychology wasn't their resistance to control. It was their willingness to share the techniques that granted that freedom, knowing that true peace could only come when every species had the right to choose their own path. The Ethics Committee's worst nightmare, Dryan mused to Agent Kael as they watched the assembly disperse, turned out to be exactly what the galaxy needed. Agent Kael smiled, a genuine human expression now, no biosculpting needed. That's the thing about nightmares. Sometimes when you face them, they turn into opportunities. Above them, on the assembly hall's screens, a new message appeared. Phase 3, integration and liberation now commencing. The real work was just beginning, and this time every species would face it together with minds truly their own. The quarantine was over. The age of genuine understanding could finally begin.